There's two types of lights we're going to talk about in this video, Omni lights and spotlights. This scene that you have has just a sphere on a gray plane. If I render this, this is what the scene looks like right now. Actually, I'll rotate this around so we have a horizon line. How about that? There we go. So that's what the scene looks like right now. The ball is actually on the ground, but you can tell, you can't tell the ball's on the ground because there's no shadow underneath it. So we have to add lighting to our scenes to make them look at least realistic and give them some sort of setting and space. Otherwise it becomes very confusing to figure out what's going on. Max will give us a default lighting, an ambient lighting basically by default, but that's only going to work as long as you're working here in the viewports making models. You're going to have to light your scenes in the end for them to look good. Now, this is not a lighting class in general. This is mainly a modeling class, but you're going to want to at least play with lights so that you can get your models to look pretty good. I'm going to go to the Light tab. It's under Create, Lights. We're dealing with Omni, Free Spot, and Target Spot. So these three. Those are the three we're going to talk about real quick. Omni lights. I'm going to zoom out in this viewport. I'm going to zoom out in my front viewport. Omni lights, the little icon looks like a little diamond, shine in all directions equally. So they're like a big flash bulb sitting in your, or not flash bulb, light bulb, sitting in your scene. And if I rotate this around to the front, what would be the front right, should cast a shadow over here. By default, if I render this, there won't be any shadows, but you can tell the light is over here and it's hitting the sphere. There's no shadow. To get a shadow, we have to go to the light parameters and turn shadows on. Now I'm just going to turn them on. I'm not going to make any settings right now, and you can see that we have a shadow. So an Omni light, just remember, shines in all directions. It's very normal, go back to Omni light, to have a few different Omni lights in your scene. I got to move them up so that they're not in the floor here. Here's my front of my scene right here. So this light here is a backlight. I can go down to my intensity, knock the multiplier down on that. Not to 4. How about 0.4? That's what I'm looking for. This one over here is going to tint the shadow a bit, so my multiplier can be maybe 0.3. And now if I render this, you'll see that we have a much lighter scene because we have more light being cast from other sources. Okay? Also remember your specularity is going to react to that as well, and things like reflectivity and refraction and so forth. So those are Omni lights. Just remember that Omni lights shine in all directions equally, and think of them as a light bulb hanging in the scene. I'm going to grab all three of these lights and delete them. I'm going to hop over here to a target spotlight. We drag out a target spotlight by left-clicking and dragging. I now have the target here. I'm going to place it right in the center of my sphere. The target can be selected like a separate object. You can also select the target from up here if you want to. And now I have a light shining right on my sphere. If I render this, again, I don't have any shadows, so I have this cone here where the spotlight is shining down. A spotlight shines in one direction, and that's represented by this triangle here. Think of it as a flashlight or like a stage spotlight. Now, my spotlight needs some help here. So if I go to intensity, you can see it's still set to 0.3, which was the last setting I set my Omni at. Now it's at 1. If I render this, it'll be brighter. Still no shadows. I need to turn shadows on. And now when I render it, I have shadows on. Here's my spotlight. Remember, it's going to be that ring there that you're going to see with spotlight. So get used to that. Omni lights won't have that in general. And again, it's very common to use a spotlight. I'm going to rotate this around to the front. with an Omni light or two. So I've got these two Omni lights here. I'm going to move them up in my scene. I'm going to click on each Omni light, knock the multiplier down, so the brightness on the Omni lights doesn't outpower the brightness I've got on my spotlight. And now if I render this, I've got a spotlight, but the Omni lights are brightening the different contours on my sphere because they're casting light as well. Alright, you can see some of this is lighter back here from those Omni lights. Alright, you can also cast shadows on multiple lights at once, but you tend to get kind of a discotheque thing happening here. You can see like that. That's because now my two Omni lights are casting shadows. We generally don't like that look. You can have shadows casting from other lights, but in general try to cast shadows only from lights that are naturally in the scene, not lights that you're trying to use to tint the scene or brighten it a little bit. So that's in general our lights. Now we've got a few more tutorials about lights coming up here, so that'll get us started. Omni and spotlights. Go ahead and play with those.